To train your spirit, never use a heater in the winter or air conditioning in the summer. It will almost kill you early on and you consider taking a day off. But I wanted to be a strong hero, so I preserved every day even until I vomited blood. Even when I felt so heavy and could barely move, I still did my squats. Even when my arms made weird popping sounds, I did my push-ups. 1 year later, I noticed a change and had become bold but strong. These are the reasons Saitama gave us to how he became the strongest being on the entire planet. Stronger than aliens like Boris, and the sole person that can take on, drumroll please, a god. Obviously, according to Saitama, it's due to him doing 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run each and every day for 3 years straight. The fact remains that Saitama displays incredible discipline to pull this off, unlike monsters who suffer from insecurity and obsession. The One Punch Man manga has confirmed monsters are born from negative emotions, whilst a true hero is made from conjuring up a strong human spirit. But I don't think you need me to tell you that something isn't quite adding up there. Surely you can't become the strongest there is just by that, right? Well, luckily for you, we think we've discovered the ultimate reason why this all makes sense. But you have to watch the entire video because I need all of you to be on the same page for this analysis to make sense.
Yeah, they had us the first half, I'm not gonna lie.
In chapter 88, the story has told us a significant factor behind Saitama surpassing everyone. Those of you that are already balls deep into the One Punch Man manga will already know what I'm about to mention. But as I said, I need to get everyone on the same page. So in chapter 88, we learned from the insight of Genus and the House of Evolution. The goal of this evil group was to achieve human perfection via forced evolution. However, it was put to a stop once Genus discovered that Saitama had naturally become the human who he aspired to create. He achieved this by tearing off what are known as limiters, and these limiters are placed by God as a means to stop people from reaching beyond their own physical capabilities, or else, you know, their power will only serve to damage themselves until the final outcome is that of a mindless, rampaging monster. This is seen in the story through Garou. In chapter 88, Garou's power began reaching a point where it physically hurt him too. After his loss to Royal Ripper and Bug God, his body was in critical condition. He began to undergo a change. His monstification progressed further, which ended up creating the rampaging monster we see currently in the story, breaking his limiter. This also ties into Psychos' theory and how limiters are broken. She states that it is possible to reach the next stage if one conquers death, and if this process is repeated, you end up with explosive growth. Therefore, both Garou and Saitama in a way have conquered death. This fits into their respective stories. Garou wanted to become a monster to make a change in the world, as it was easier than becoming a hero, as stated by Saitama in chapter 93 of the webcomic. Therefore, both Garou and Saitama in a way have conquered death. Let's not forget that their characters parallel each other. This fits into their respective stories. Garou wanted to become a monster to make a change in the world, as it was easier than becoming a hero, as stated by Saitama in chapter 93 of the webcomic. Garou broke his limiters by reaching a near-death state, by facing the strongest opponents he could without a second's thought. However, Saitama on the other hand had no natural talent and broke his limiter through sheer willpower and hard work, meaning the 3 years of consecutive training Saitama did caused him to reach a near-death experience. Oh, and yeah, of course, we can't forget the boldness again. To better understand how all of this ties into the story of One Punch Man and how Saitama will have to face God because he has become the strongest hero through doing something that we will explain later on in the video, please stick with us here. You have to hit the notification bell as we explain the character of God and and what his powers are in the past. This was a collaboration with our friend Zonin, who has returned to follow up on it, explaining the inspirations behind Saitama's character and how it all links back to the character named God.
Hello again, ABD viewers. I have returned to tell you more deep cut One Punch Man stuff and why the story further relates to Egyptian mythology. So last time we talked about how God was based off of Osiris, who is the Egyptian god of the moon. And I know Moon Knight is very hot right now, and it tells us that Khonshu is the god of the moon, and that is true, but there's more than one. I also explained how a large part of One Punch Man, and more so God's story, is based off of the Osiris myth.
Previously.
Because like I said, this is the myth of Osiris. And just like how Osiris himself was tricked by Set and 72 other accomplices to be put into a box that was cut into pieces and thrown into the Nile, God seemingly has suffered a similar fate. As for them being scattered to temples across the land, this of course goes back to what Isis did with replicating the pieces of Osiris to put in temples that would become places of his worship. We see this quite literally happening in One Punch Man as well. But now that we've established who represents the moon, let's talk about who represents the sun, because you guessed it, it's Saitama. Just like God, Saitama is also based partly off of an Egyptian god himself, in the god of the sun, Ra. Ra was believed to rule in all parts of the created world, the sky, the earth, and the underworld. He was the god of the sun, order, kings, and the sky. Since the people regarded Ra as a principal god, creator of the universe and source of life, he had a strong influence on them, which led him to being one of the most worshipped of all of the Egyptian gods, and even considered the king of the gods. So as we've established, we have our god of the sun and our god of the moon. Saitama, the ultimate good, versus God, the ultimate evil. So once you boil it down to its bare essentials, it's essentially the same story that all other battle mangas are. Now if we go even more into inside baseball with One Punch Man, we can see that One, the creator of the series, intended for Saitama to represent the sun for a very long time. One of One's previous works is called Taiyo Man. At certain times in the series, we actually see Saitama himself reading Taiyo Man, but in Japanese, Taiyo means sun, man, Ra, god of the sun. And I'm also pretty sure this is why Saitama is bald. Yes, it's iconoclastic and individualizes Saitama from the typical manga hero. But aside from that, I'm pretty sure it's meant to represent that he is the sun. I mean, you could go through multiple instances of the series and see the sun coming from behind Saitama. But anyway, with Ra, we also get the symbology of the Eye of Ra. In One Punch Man, this is the counterpart to the Eye of Horus, which is like what the bad guys have, usually represented in a singular eye, as where the Eye of Ra is usually represented with the right eye or just the right side in general, which we primarily see with the good guys. Now, Ra also had a human form named Atum, and this is where we get King. This is why Saitama and King have the relationship that they do, and why King is referred to as the strongest man on Earth, despite not literally being that, because we know Saitama is. But also why all of King's big known feats are literally the feats of Saitama. And also when Saitama first meets King, it's after King is slashed on his left side by the octopus claw man. But if you look closer, this monster represents the moon. And then we eventually see Saitama come to save King. Wouldn't you know it, the sun is directly behind him in this sequence. Also, the chief cultic center of Ra was in Heliopolis, and Heliopolis is the hero association where Saitama lives. And lastly, in some accounts, humans were created from Ra's tears and sweat. And if we go back to chapter 86, when Dr. Genius is explaining the limiter and how Saitama broke it, we see Saitama sweating with tears from his eyes. This represents, of course, that once Saitama has removed his limiter, he is now strong enough to defeat God, therefore giving humanity back to the humans and taking away the vice grip that he had on humanity by controlling humanity with monsters and also turning them into monsters. So that's all the time I have here. If you would like to go way more in depth into all of this stuff and how Egyptian mythology relates to more aspects of One Punch Man than just Saitama and God, please check out the playlist that I have on this series. They might have a link in the description, but back to the video.
Following up from what Zonin has stated, we can now talk about the web comic, because in chapter 119 of the One Punch Man One-Man webcomic, it is mentioned by Amai Mask that the world has been through many eras. He explains how the population fought against each other for land in world wars until the population decreased to the point where they prioritize helping the future generations. This was the first era of change. However, the aftermath of war still seeped through as things like climate change reshaped the world again, resulting in the second era of change where the population had to migrate to a single landmass to survive. The way humanity survived all of this though is due to them being constant environmental beings. However, this is no longer the case in modern society. In a way, you could imagine it as humanity reaching a point in their evolution where they have reached the peak of their limits or have found an over-reliance on a system, like the hero system being one example. That's why Blast states to Tatsumaki never to rely on someone else, and only comes around when humanity is in danger, as he is focusing on the wider mission of an intergalactic space force against God. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind a little as I'm about to explain why Saitama became the strongest. Essentially, all of this and the rapid occurrence of monsters appearing more and more and they're getting stronger as the heroes have mentioned in recent times is getting worse, it means that they are currently going through their third era of change. As stated by Amai Mask, an immune system is needed to fight back and survive this new era. And the fact that Amai Mask labels Saitama as the superhero that will bring change to this chaotic new world, it's the author's way of confirming that Saitama is the very first of the new era of perfect humans which Genos had tried to create. Overall, Saitama is the strongest being on the planet because he has adapted to the new era, and this caused his limiter to break. But there is a very dangerous downfall of doing so. So stick around to the end of the video of how this ties into Saitama facing God. Essentially, in the webcomic chapter 119, it's said that humans such as Adam and Eve adapted to their environment. They may be weak, but this magnificent feature of their design is what puts them above other creatures, and they were able to survive on Earth. Now let's take a look at what Saitama says on how he believes he became strong.
あなたと遊んでいる貴様らでは決してここまでたどり着けん。自分で変われるのが人間の強さだ。
Even this simple comedic statement of Saitama saying don't use air conditioning or a heater in times of excruciating weather, it basically proves that Saitama is stating you should adapt to the environment instead of changing it to suit your needs. You as a person should train your human spirit to adapt to the environment. Therefore, in his own words and philosophy, Saitama directly links to the era of change in the world, where humans adapt to the environment, rather than technology forcing evolution or other nonsense such as the Neo heroes to advance the race. That's just inorganic growth. Saitama clearly states discipline, ideals, and determination is needed to become better as a human. On the other hand, this change in era was purposely crafted by this character named God as a way to force humanity into reaching a point where they desired power so that he could manipulate them into doing his bidding. Now you may be wondering, ABD, what do you mean? Where is the evidence for this? Well, this is reflected in Homeless Emperor's story. Homeless Emperor despised humanity after constantly being dealt the short straw his entire life, until God offered him power to make a difference by helping him destroy humanity. The destruction of humanity, however, isn't God's goal. It's to coerce humanity into freeing him from a prison. Yes, that's right, his prison. We theorize that God was betrayed by other galactic beings who trapped his body in cubes that we see in One Punch Man, and then he was abandoned on a weak, docile planet where nobody could interfere, also known as planet Earth. Now again, how God can be on the moon if he was banished to Earth, right? Well, one of the most widely accepted theories by scientists is that the moon is a piece of debris formed during a collision between an early Earth. Before there was life and another planet, it was known as the Giant Impact Hypothesis. Therefore, the God we see in the fetal position in chapter 138 is the real God that is imprisoned on the moon, watching down on planet Earth, manipulating the events. Now, as Zonin mentioned, God is based off of Osiris, who in Egyptian mythology is a symbol of fertility, agriculture, the afterlife, the dead, resurrection, life, and vegetation. This gives us an inclination into God's powers of creating life. We saw him give homeless emperor the power of light manipulation, and of course, light has a huge influence on life as it is the basic source of energy. Therefore, when God was banished to Earth, he used his powers to create life and turned this nothing planet into one that was flourishing with life so that he could manipulate it into freeing him from his prison. God uses the monsters to force humanity to strive for more, which is why he offers them powers as they are desperate, making them vulnerable to his manipulation. At the same time, the increase in monsters also gives an increased chance at a strong monster like Orochi being born as a worthy sacrifice for the altar. We see on the altar that Orochi discovers that humans are sacrificing different things to a being which resembles Orochi himself. We see that Orochi grew stronger thanks to the sacrifices that Saikos gave to him, to the point where he was able to try and take over her body and ultimately merge with her. However, Orochi misunderstood the altar, believing that he was the god and searched for a worthy sacrifice, whereas really he is the worthy sacrifice for God. In fact, on this altar, it further confirms that God was responsible for all life and the path of evolution that it took. As underneath the humans provide sacrifices for Orochi, we see a number of extinct species such as an ancient marine reptile, dinosaurs, and others. Connecting all of the dots, when Saikos gets enlightened and takes God's power in chapter 132, ascending above humanity in her eyes, she refers back to Adam and Eve, stating that this is the end point towards which all intelligent life has been headed since the beginning. This is only after God's influence, which means she gained insight in his desire, confirming God's manipulation of man and the change of each era, as he uses a snake that resembles Orochi to influence Eve's actions, and subsequently Saikos too, as merging with this snake gave her access to unimaginable power that just so happened to also resemble the light manipulation that homeless emperor received, further exemplifying God's influence. Another piece of evidence that proves this analysis is the fact that the monster cells that were created look like the character of God, as he is spreading his influence across the globe to achieve a new era. And there is also a subtle foreshadowing that God has been split into multiple cubes that Blast is investigating. For instance, when Sonic had one of these monster cells that resemble him, he decided to split it into multiple pieces. So overall, this God being, who actually is playing the role of a devil, has been creating man from the start according to the story. God gave certain people certain powers to enact his plan. That's why this woman Saikos sees it as divine punishment. This is actually linked into the myth of Osiris, and you know, since we're called Anime Balls Deep, we might as well go even deeper, because this is what's crazy. Saikos' character is actually linked into the myth of Osiris, as Saikos is based on his sister and wife, Isis. In Egyptian mythology, Isis used her powers to bring her brother Osiris back to life for a single night, but no longer than that, as she was not strong enough. What do we see in the One Punch Man manga? Well, God's first appearance is in the Monster Association arc when Saikos and Orochi were at their peak of power. For that one night, God was essentially brought back, which is also why Blast returned. However, of course, as I mentioned, Orochi didn't end up being the true sacrifice, and that will actually be someone like Saitama. This character named God will realize that Saitama is the ultimate evolution of man and has perfectly broken his limiter. He's the only person that can stop his release. In One Punch Man chapter 161, we see God is watching Saitama vs Garou, and Blast has appeared in the midst of battle. This is entirely different from the web comic. Blast isn't even revealed there, but in the manga he is. God tried to imitate Blast and knows of his presence and planned to stop him. So as he is witnessing these fights, with how easily the centipede and water were destroyed even though he granted them power, the manga will reveal even more insight on what he intends to do. So unlike Garou, who he was spectating during the Monster Association arc, as Garou ultimately will lose the power that he gained, it showcases that although he broke his limiter, he didn't achieve its potential. Just like when Orochi thought that he was God on the altar after his defeat to Saitama. God will try to make Saitama the ultimate pawn for his plan, but it just won't work out. God has been creating evolution this entire time for someone to sprout out and merge with the planet, as Psychos mentioned this, but obviously Saitama is limitless and he will face this supposed god, destroy him, and in the end save the entire planet. Now if you haven't hit the notification bell and you're still confused, you're like, wait, how did he just explain if Saitama is strong? Well, if you understand the story a tiny bit better, I have done a part 1 video. It's another collab with Zonin, who you should definitely check out. The video is being displayed right now. Go watch it.